anything that you'd like to say, Karmelo? Do you have anything that you'd like to say to the victim, to the family of the victim? Why were you armed, sweetheart? Karmelo, why were you armed at school? Explain your self-defense. How is this self-defense?
That's what you're not gonna do. You do not get in a woman's face. 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 I don't give a fuck about none of this. You do not get in a woman's face. You do. As a matter of fact, no, you do not get it. Hold up. Don't say it. No, I'm gonna smile. Because the funny part is, hold up.
Outside the Collin County Courthouse, a crowd has gathered, signs in the air, a banner stretched wide, "Free Karmelo." Supporters chanting, some crying, some shouting that the trial was rigged, that the jury was racist, that justice never stood a chance inside that building. And right in the middle of all of it, Karmelo Anthony's brother, standing with his people, chest forward, voice raised at Austin Metcalf's father, who walked straight into that space. You don't put your face in front of a woman. You don't put your face in front of a woman. Over and over. Because Jeff Metcalf, a man who had already buried his son, already been doxxed, already had a SWAT team show up at his home over a false call, already lost his job, had stepped too close to a woman on the Anthony side. And whatever invisible line had been holding these two worlds apart for 14 months just snapped. Right there on that sidewalk in McKinney, Texas, in front of cameras, in front of police, in front of the whole country watching on their phones. And then inside that same building, a jury had just handed down their answer. 35 years. Karmelo Anthony, 19 years old, head shaved, dressed in prison clothes, was seen crying as the sentence was read aloud. His mother had stood before that jury and begged for mercy. The defense had spent days arguing he acted out of terror. The jury took 2.5 hours and said no. 2 families, both devastated. One carrying a casket, one carrying a verdict. And an entire country outside that courthouse screaming past each other about what it all means, when most of them weren't even in Frisco on April 2nd, 2025. None of them heard what was said under that tent. None of them saw what happened in those final seconds before a 17-year-old boy pressed his hands to his chest and ran down a bleacher, calling for someone to help him. So let's go back to where it actually started, because the version the internet told you is not the whole story. And before we get into it, if you're new here, subscribe to Mystora Crimes right now and hit that bell. These are real families. Real loss. Austin Metcalf's mother still wakes up without her son. His twin brother still carries that weight every single day. These stories deserve more than a trending hashtag. Stay with me. This one goes all the way down. Frisco, Texas, a planned suburb north of Dallas, and one of the fastest growing cities in America. Clean streets, top-rated schools, youth sports complexes on every corner. The kind of place where high school athletes have college scouts watching by junior year. Both of these boys grew up in that world. Both of them were doing well inside it. Austin Metcalf was a junior at Memorial High School, MVP linebacker on the football team, track athlete, a 3.97 GPA. He also worked part-time at a pizza place down the street from his house. Because he wasn't just talented, he was the kind of kid who stayed busy on purpose. People who knew him described him as direct and confident, the kind of person who would speak up when something felt wrong and expected to be taken seriously. Not a bully, but not someone who would shrink from a confrontation either. He had a twin brother named Hunter. They played football together, ran in the same circles, moved through the world as a unit the way twins do. There's something particular about being a twin. You never really walk into a room alone, until one day you do. And that day came for Hunter Metcalf on a rainy Wednesday morning, at a track meet in front of hundreds of people. Karmelo Anthony was a junior at Centennial High School, same district, just a few miles across town. He captained the football team. He ran track. He carried a 3.7 GPA and had absolutely no criminal record. He was the oldest of 4 children, originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Everyone in his life described him the same way: responsible, a natural leader, the one the younger siblings looked up to. Nobody who knew him had ever seen him be violent. Nobody in his circle could point to a moment and say, that was the red flag, that was a sign. These were not two kids from broken homes or troubled histories. They were athletes with futures and people who believed in them. And that is exactly what makes this case so disorienting, because the easy narrative the internet built around them doesn't hold up when you look at who they actually were before that morning. They had never met each other. No history, no prior run-in. Two strangers from the same suburb who ended up in the same small space on a rainy morning. And by 10 o'clock, one of them was dead. The only question that mattered at trial, and still matters now, is who turned that space into the last place Austin Metcalf would ever stand. April 2nd, 2025. David Kuykendall Stadium, Frisco, Texas. The district-wide track championship is scheduled for that morning, but thunderstorms roll in fast, and the meet gets delayed. Hundreds of kids from multiple schools are stuck outside, crowding under whatever shelter they can find. Karmelo Anthony ends up under the Memorial High School tent, the rival school's designated space in the bleachers. Not his team's tent, someone else's. The defense pointed out early that another student under that tent actually knew Anthony and greeted him when he sat down. He wasn't a complete stranger to the space. But here's what happened next, and this part is not in dispute because student after student described it the same way. Anthony was asked to leave. Once, then again, then again. Witnesses testified that he was asked to move approximately 15 times by multiple people. The first was Hunter Metcalf. Then others joined in, and each time Anthony refused, not quietly, not with any kind of apology or explanation. He refused with language that made the students around him deeply uncomfortable long before anyone made physical contact. If you want me to move, you have to move me. Touch me, and you'll find out. Multiple witnesses used nearly identical words to describe him. He looked like he was looking for a fight. One student recalled Austin Metcalf actually trying to de-escalate at one point, saying directly, "I'm not going to fight you at a track meet." He wasn't trying to throw hands. He was trying to get this person out of their space. But Anthony kept refusing, and Austin kept pushing back verbally. And then Anthony reached into his backpack, right in front of witnesses, and said, "Touch me and see what happens." He had a knife in that bag, a black folding knife, brought to a school event on a school day in a public stadium packed with teenagers and coaches and parents. Why? That question, for letters one syllable, was never answered at trial. The defense didn't address it. Anthony never testified. The prosecution let that gap sit in front of the jury like an open wound, because there is no version of bringing a concealed knife to a high school track meet that doesn't change the story of everything that came after it. Austin Metcalf shoved him. One push, and the knife came out.
Your mom told me that you were there.
Yes, ma'am.
If you don't mind, what happened?
There was this kid, before I knew his name now, this kid was sitting under our tent at track. We asked him to move. He started getting aggressive and talking reckless. And my brother stepped in and said, "You need to move." He's like, "Make me move." Austin grabbed his backpack. The kid, I tried to whip around as fast as I could, but I didn't see the stab. But then I look at my brother, and then I'm not going to talk about the rest. So
Yeah.
Just
One stab. Austin Metcalf ran down those bleachers with his hands pressed against his chest, telling the people around him to get help. He was still conscious, still moving, still asking. Athletic trainers got to him and started chest compressions. Police arrived to find him unresponsive. He was rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead within minutes of arriving. The Collin County Medical Examiner would later describe the wound to the jury, a large, gaping, 2-inch injury directly to the heart. Unsurvivable. There was no version of that moment where Austin Metcalf walked out of that stadium alive. And while all of that was happening, while his brother Hunter was somewhere in that crowd watching trainers work on him, Karmelo Anthony walked up to a police officer and turned himself in. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was crying, emotional, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I was protecting myself." Then in the back of the police car, he asked the officer if Austin was going to be okay, and then he asked whether what he did could be considered self-defense. 3 statements in a row, a claim, a concern, a legal question. the behavior of a teenager trying to process something that had already gone too far to take back. But then, when the officer radioed that he had the alleged suspect in custody, Anthony stopped him. "I'm not alleged. I did it." That line defined this case for over a year. It is a confession and a cry wrapped into 5 words. And the psychological tension it creates is something the jury had to carry into that deliberation room. Because it sounds like honesty. It sounds like remorse. But it does not sound like someone who is purely a victim of circumstances. The defense built their case on the word fear. Anthony was smaller than Metcalf. A shove from a linebacker is not nothing. Texas law does not require you to absorb a beating before you defend yourself. All of that is true. All of it is legally real. But the prosecution came back to the knife every single time. Because self-defense is a response to an immediate threat. It is not arriving to a location already armed, escalating a situation with threatening language, and then deploying a hidden blade the moment someone touches you first. The jury saw the difference between those two things clearly. The trial opened June 1st, 2026. Collin County Courthouse, McKinney, Texas. And from the very first morning, the scene outside told you everything about how far beyond 2 teenagers this had traveled. Free Karmelo banners, justice for Austin signs, police barricades separating groups that could barely look at each other, a woman outside the courthouse calling the trial a legal lynching, chants, cameras, shouting, because in the 14 months between that track meet and that courtroom, this case had become a full-scale culture war. Anthony is black, Metcalf was white, and the internet weaponized that fact before the first piece of evidence was ever presented. A January 6th participant held a rally at the stadium under a banner reading, "Protect White America." Civil rights organizations raised over $500,000 for Anthony's legal defense. A fake autopsy report got millions of views before it was debunked. Both fathers were doxxed and lost their jobs. Both families were swatted. The FBI opened investigations. 2 boys from the same suburb, and the entire country fell apart over them. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution called 21 witnesses. Student after student described Anthony as the aggressor, the one who refused to leave, who issued threats, who had his hand in that bag before anyone touched him. The medical examiner laid out the wound in terms that left no room for interpretation. And through all of it, the prosecution kept returning to the one question the defense never answered. Why did he have a knife? The defense rested without putting Anthony on the stand. Their argument was sudden passion, that in the split second Metcalf shoved him, Anthony reacted out of pure terror with no time to think. If the jury agreed, the sentence could have been as low as 2 years. District Attorney Bill Worski delivered the line that defined the whole trial in closing. "You don't get to meet a shove with stab, especially if you provoke the shove." The jury came back in under 3 hours, guilty of murder. In the sentencing phase, the defense called one witness, Anthony's mother, Kayla Hayes. She told the jury her son was her firstborn, that she loved him, that he was sorry. It was the only voice offered in his defense. The jury sentenced him to 35 years. Austin's mother told the room, "For journalists and activists, this is a story. For our family, this is our reality." His father slammed his fist down. "People think grief is sadness. It is not. It is rage." 1 day later, Anthony filed his notice of appeal. Let's sit here for a minute, because I don't think anyone walks away from this case feeling clean. It refuses to give you a simple villain. Karmelo Anthony had no record, no history of violence, a future in front of him, and he brought a concealed knife to a school event and used it on a stranger over a tent. Both of those things are true at the same time. Our minds want to grab one and discard the other. This case will not let you. What does it mean that he had that knife? Was it something he carried out of habit that never mattered until the one day it did? Or did some part of him know walking into that stadium that things might go physical? The defense never answered it. Anthony never answered it. And that silence, more than any witness, may be what sealed 35 years. And then there is Austin Metcalf. Direct, physical, a kid who pushed back, literally, on someone who had already warned him that pushing was dangerous. Does that make Austin responsible? The jury said no. You cannot stab someone for a shove you provoked. But it makes the story messier than either side of the internet was willing to admit. Because underneath all the noise, this is a story about how fast two lives can end. Not one, two. One in a hospital in Frisco, one in a prison cell in Texas, and a twin brother walking to the world alone, carrying a morning that lasted less than 10 minutes. Do you think 35 years was fair? Do you think self-defense had any ground to stand on once that knife appeared? And when Anthony looked that officer in the eye and said, "I'm not alleged, I did it," do you think he believed he was protecting himself? Or did he already know the answer? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Mystora Crimes, hit that bell, and share this with someone who needs a full story, not just a headline. Some cases stay with you. This is one of them. I'll see you in the next one.